Everyone. We appreciate you being with us. We're going to have some more folks who are coming in, so we're going to wait a minute or so before we officially start the program. But I appreciate you being with us today for our first session of Creating a Safer Upstate Beyond the Shield, focusing on hot button topics. Can you see my screen, Stan? Do I have the screen with the Behind the Shield logo on it? Okay, perfect. So as we get started, I just wanted to again welcome everyone. I'm Dean Hebel. I'm the Executive Director of 10 at the Top. And for those who are not familiar, our organization focuses on creating partnerships and collaboration on issues that impact economic vitality and quality of life in our 10-county region. And it's hard to believe now, but a little over a year ago, we started conversations with law enforcement leaders and community leaders and business leaders across the upstate around the issue of public and community safety and how to work collaboratively to ensure the safety of both our law enforcement officials and our members of our community, our residents. And we had initially a committee, a discovery committee of about 50 people who came up with some recommendations. And from that, under the guidance of our fearless moderator, Stan Davis, we have worked through a number of those. And one of the areas that we felt was important was to have the opportunity for dialogue and discussion where we're looking at the issues and hearing the voices from our law enforcement leaders on around those, but also from leaders from within the community. What are concerns and questions? There are a lot of misconceptions around some of the things that law enforcement works on in our national media, especially. We hear a lot of noise. And so we felt at a local level, this was an opportunity for us to bring folks together to really get into those details and be transparent about what we're looking at as a community. So we have, as you can see on the screen, 4 sessions planned over the course of the remainder of this year. Today's focus is on the use of force. Then we will look at the next session around technology, things like body cameras and car tag readers and things of that nature, how they are used by our law enforcement officials. The third session will be focused on hiring, recruiting, retention, and training. And then for the fourth session, we're going to flip it. For the first 3, we have our panel is made up of law enforcement leaders, and then we also have some community leaders who are joining us to specifically lead the question and answer component. But for the fourth session, we're going to flip it and do it the other way, where we're going to invite our community leaders to lead the conversation on what are some of the concerns and issues around neighborhood safety that they hear in our communities across the upstate, and then have our law enforcement leaders kind of respond to those. So we're looking forward to these 4 sessions. I think it's really a chance for us to start this dialogue, both in this Zoom and virtual element, but we're also recording these sessions so they are available for others to hear. And again, it's all about transparency and building trust amongst our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Matt Hamby from the city of Greer, who has really done an awesome job in coordinating this. And when we started the idea, Matt really jumped on board at the very beginning. And Matt, I want to thank you most especially for doing that, and for all you have done in guiding these conversations. And I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our panelists and our program for today.
Thank you very much, Dean. And I want to acknowledge your leadership as well. throughout this past year or so with the Safer Upstate initiative. There's been a lot of people involved from all across the Upstate, and this takes a lot of coordination, and you've done a fabulous job with that. And also the leadership of Mayor Terrence Roberts with the City of Anderson and Sheriff Clark, who have co-chaired the Safer Upstate committee initiatives. First of all, we're going to try to keep this generally within the 1 hour. So we may appear to be moving quite rapidly, but we want to provide an opportunity for questions so that we can address your specific concerns today. But well, I'd like to just kind of start with why are we here at this place today on this Zoom call? Let's just admit that the Committee of Safer Upstate initiative, it began in the aftermath of the George Floyd incident on Memorial Day of 2020. And that really shook our nation and basically created a universal household level conversation, and every single community was affected by this. If you go back even 5 years further, back to Ferguson, Missouri, the New York City incident, Baltimore, North Charleston, in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of focus on law enforcement and law enforcement practices, law enforcement policies, and even law enforcement officers in general. The national media has provided most of the narrative, I believe, that has created a lot of the discussion and doubt. The national media has provided a lot of questions for people to talk about. Some of them are, all of a sudden, there is a huge problem of police use of force, that it has all of a sudden gotten out of control. Everyday police are plotting to use force against the citizens. Another narrative is it's not safe for African-American males to get in their car and go anywhere. I've heard those concerns personally, and I, as a law enforcement professional, and all the other panelists here today, this is very disheartening for us to hear these things. We wanted to provide an opportunity for law enforcement to talk about some real life data, some real life explanation on police use of force, because unfortunately the only thing available so far has been what is provided by the national media and also social media posts that people share. So we have a panel of 4 of us from law enforcement management across the Upstate, and I'll briefly introduce them and I'll begin the discussion, and then I'll turn it over to the next panelist and so forth. So we'll each talk approximately 4 to 5 minutes, be very quick, and that will allow us some time to answer any questions. So after I speak for just a minute, I will turn it over to Chief Tony Taylor, who's present with us today. Tony is the police chief in Williamston, South Carolina. I do know he was formerly with Greenville Sheriff's Office. He's instructed at the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy, and he also he's a member of the Training Council. So he has a lot to say about, or a lot of knowledge on the issue of training for law enforcement, so he'll speak on that. And secondly, Chief Jim Stewart with Anderson Police Department is here with us today. And I believe Jim has worked exclusively at Anderson Police Department, I believe since he's been the chief since 2012. So he has a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge that he's bringing to us today. And then thirdly, Deputy Chief Jennifer Kendall with the Spartanburg Police Department is also here with us today. And she will talk about prevention and de-escalation, and also share some real-time data on use of force at her agency in Spartanburg. So I will first talk about why do we even have the concept of using force in law enforcement. The main objectives whenever use of force is used is either the protection of life, and that could be the life of a citizen, who's in immediate jeopardy or for the officer to protect their own life. This type of force can range from very low amount of force all the way up to, in rare instances, deadly force. The second or the other reasons that use of force would ever be justified is in the actions of enforcing a law, to effect an arrest for a crime that was committed, or effect a legal investigatory stop to investigate a crime in progress. Law enforcement use of force is regulated by the Fourth Amendment of our U.S. Constitution. The Fourth Amendment provides that citizens are protected from unreasonable searches and seizures from government officials. And of course, law enforcement falls into that category of government officials. The Fourth Amendment was written somewhat vaguely by our framers of our Constitution, but that vagueness was likely intentional. Our court systems over time have provided interpretations for the Fourth Amendment as they issue decisions on appeal cases in our court appeals. Over time, two prevailing cases have resulted in becoming the guiding principles for police use of force in our policies and procedures that we all adapt. The first one is Graham versus Connor. And I'll speak very briefly. I'm not going to go through the entire case and the history of that. But in essence, the result of the Graham-Connor decision was that all uses of force in an arrest or seizure of a citizen are judged by the Fourth Amendment's objective reasonableness standard. This objective reasonable standard analysis consists of a three-pronged test. So the officers, as they use force, they have to make a decision based on these three criteria. The first one is the severity of the offense. For example, are we talking about jaywalking? Are we talking about shoplifting? A catalytic converter theft? A sexual assault? An armed robbery? An aggravated assault? A homicide? So the level of crime that we're dealing with does have to come into play in our decision to use force or not. Second prong is, did the suspect pose an immediate threat to the officers or others? In other words, are they acting compliant? Are they standing there? Are they being passively resistant? Are they putting up a verbal objection to being arrested? Are they threatening the officer with words? Are they in a fighting stance? Do they have a weapon? Do they not have a weapon? All of these various questions come up in that second prong. The third one is the suspect actively resisting or attempting to evade arrest by flight? So one concern or consideration would be, are they being compliant? Are they cooperating? Well, if they are, use of force won't be justified, obviously. If they're simply trying to get away, running away, a certain level of force may be acceptable in those circumstances. The second prevailing case that guides our policies and procedures is Tennessee versus Garner. And that was a civil case in which the Supreme Court held that under the Fourth Amendment, when law enforcement officers are pursuing a fleeing suspect, the officer may not use deadly force to prevent escape unless the officer has probable cause to believe the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or citizens. So basically, these two cases are what I call the meat and potatoes of law enforcement policies as it refers to use of force. Law enforcement agencies provide guidelines for their officers in the form of policies and procedures, or like in my agency's case, we call them general orders. These policies are publicly available here at Greer. In my agency, they are available on the City of Greer's website. So we do offer transparency. It's free for anybody to look those up and review them and call me if you have questions, or anybody within our agency. We're more than happy to talk about these policies and procedures. Additionally, law enforcement officers are provided continuous training training at the academy and training as they continue on with their career. So that's a good transition. We'll go over to Chief Tony Taylor at this time, and he'll talk about the issue of training with regards to use of force. Over to you, Tony.
Okay, everybody hear me? Okay, good morning. Good morning. How's everybody doing? My name is Tony Taylor. I've been appointed by Governor McMaster's to be a part of the Law Enforcement Training Council. What the Training Council is that we kind of guide the training for the Criminal Justice Academy, but we also deal with certification issues. Each officer has a certification when they graduate from the academy, and that certification belongs to the Criminal Justice Academy. And there are certain situations where when that person may be terminated from an agency, we take a look at his credentials, and if he meets a certain criteria, then we take those credentials from him where he cannot police in the state of South Carolina. And what we also do is enter that into a national database as well. And some of the things we look at in that is excessive force. If they have a complaint of excessive force, and a lot of the things we deal with is just being people not being truthful in their investigations or issues, different policy violations that they are not being truthful, and we will take their certifications. One of the things that we've done just this week in our meeting, since we're talking about deadly force and those kind of things, one of the things that we've done, and like I said, we met just Monday, is that we are going to be requiring reserve officers and advanced class 3s to take psychological testing. That is one of the things that we have been requiring for a class 1 officer to go through the academy. If they have psychological testing, and there's some money that has been left over. And one of the things that we will be doing from now on, if they have a reserve officer, which a reserve officer works so many hours, they work for free, but they come in and they have to be able to pass the test at the academy to qualify as a reserve officer. But now we're including the psychological testing. Also for the advanced class 3 that may work courthouse or do duties like that, but we'll call them advanced class 3s, they have to come to the academy as well to take some courses. They're going to be required to take the psychological testing as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing, and we just currently did that this week. One of the things that we pushed out as well from the academy, and we're talking about deadly force, is we pushed out the duty to intervene. We think that's extremely important, that if an officer is not following the policy, not following proper protocol when dealing with an individual, then it is up to the other officer to intervene in that particular situation and also report that to a supervisor in regards to that officer. So we have the duty to intervene. Now, one of the things that we're stressing when we talk about use of force is we've been dealing a lot with mental health, stressing when to properly use deadly force or use some of the tools that we've been given, like our taser, dealing with mental health issues. So we are training in regards to that. And I think he mentioned Graham versus Connor, in which it deals with excessive force. And one of the things that we looked at, if you got a person that's suicidal and they're threatening themselves, then does that lead us to use deadly force? And that would be a Graham versus Connor situation, where that may not necessarily be the case for us to use that deadly force if they are applying that to themselves, harm to themselves. So we're working very hard in making sure that we instruct in the area of deadly force in areas of mental health, when to use it, when not to use it, just because somebody's not coming into compliance. And so that's where we are at the academy. And he covered basically the nuts and bolts of deadly force. We talked about the levels of resistance and those kind of things. And also, we actually use the shoot, don't shoot scenarios at the academy as well. We train them as well. And also, we have a mobile training team. The academy now has a mobile training team that actually will come out to agencies and actually go back through some of these things. some of these, what we call these type of deadly force issues or the critical skill sets. They would actually come to the agencies and actually do a refresher on a lot of these critical skill sets that we have. So that's what we're doing at the academy. We're moving forward, straight forward. We're very forward thinking, and we are being very aggressive in the area of deadly force and trying to give them the proper tools that they need in making those split-second decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Taylor. Appreciate your comments. We'll now go over to Chief Stewart with Anderson Police Department, who will talk about oversight and maybe other ideas that he has on his mind.
Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well. Justine, can you switch me to where I can share the screen?
Ron, you should be able to.
Okay. I click share screen. That'll work. Okay. Am I good?
Good.
Okay. I'm just going to start off with just talking about some of our policies. So this is our webpage, as Chief Hamby stated. We're very transparent. To see any of our general orders, and that's kind of what I'm going to share with you just to begin with. Our general orders are also listed on our webpage. Share some that we started last year, July 2020. If you go, you'll see all our policies, but the first one, most important, is called response to resistance. Some agencies call it use of force, but you'll notice last year what we did highlight in red is the changes we made, predominantly due to the George Floyd incident. You'll see that we have put in new language for chokehold, neck restraints, intervene, de-escalation, duty of care. This is a very long policy. As you'll see, it is 16 pages. We've added the new language as what you see. And this is something that in training that we do every year. We review this every year, once a year, and everyone signs off that they have understood what the new changes are. So not only this policy was updated, but we also instituted a duty to intervene policy based on the same incidents. And this was, like I said, put out by Chief Gill as best recommendations and for accreditation purposes. So this is one that we didn't have until last year, requiring an officer a duty to intervene. Now it pretty much spells out in general orders that basically based on the George Floyd incident, that everyone has the same responsibility as the officer. If one of our officers is out of line, it's the duty of any officer to tap in, step out, or take over that scene. Kind of along these same lines, looking at these policies, and I think Chief Hamby covered a little bit and Chief Taylor, but we most recently have completed our defensive tactics training. That was a week-long class. Officers were required to attend one of those days, August 2nd through 6th, to go over the basic fundamentals of defensive tactics. And you're thinking about that, but there's a lot more that officers are required to do each year. Not only that, firearms training, we do day and night qualifications. We also carry backup weapons on our ankles, so that's 38, another qualification. All of our officers are issued a AR-15 patrol rifle. So you got another qualification. So not only that, you're qualifying with a taser, you're qualifying with those weapons, and AST baton training. And like Chief Taylor said, we also had the advantage, we're very fortunate in the city to use some of the seized funds and purchased a TI training simulator. So, you know, saying all that, there is continuous training all of the time to maintain those standards. Kind of skipping around a little bit, I'm going to show you a little bit of the review process. Every time that one of our officers uses a use of force, they're required to complete this form, and just show it to you real briefly. So this is our City of Anderson response to resistance form. And you see it's very detailed. It's a 4-page report. List all their information, the suspect's information, articulate exactly what happened. This is in addition to an incident report, exact locations, what was used, what type of force was used, and particularly if a weapon, chemical, baton, taser, they're required to circle on the body. Was body camera available? And at the most, at the end, you'll see that it's not only signed off by the supervisor, the training officer reviews that, our internal affairs officer reviews that, and then at the end, I actually review that. So there's quite a review process involved anytime that the use of force is used. Also, we are, as Matt Hamby said, Chief Hamby, we are transparent in that. And I kind of picked this up from Chief Mullins here. And I think I've mentioned this before, but we also put all of our use of force on the website. As you can see, this is from 2021. Have any questions? The media especially has these. They ask for all our use of force, and we just tell them basically they're available on our website. Now, we maintain the same log as what you see, only it has the officer's name and it has the suspect's name. And we keep that for reporting purposes. But for what we put out on the web, this is kind of what you see. And last but not least, what is very good is our body camera. Each agency basically has different body cameras. This is the one that our department chose. It's mobile view. And just tell you, it has some functions that we really liked. Has the ability to capture a picture, which we can add to an incident report from the body camera. There's been controversy about this back and forth between chiefs and sheriffs. So this body camera has night vision. So the picture is going to show you a night vision picture, and that might not exactly be what the suspect or the officer saw, but it's much clearer and it shows the scene. And it also has the ability to capture audio should you're doing an interview where there's not a need for video. And this is technology. Body camera has become very much part of an officer's tool belt. It's used for prosecution. It tends to clear the officer at times for frivolous complaints. We also use it for training issues. When there's something that we see as supervisors that can be corrected, we can share that with everybody. That being said, the city is also part with SLED in the National Use of Force reporting. So we're sending all that information that we capture, we send that to SLED as most other agencies do. And that's again part of the accreditation process. And I feel like I've ran through that pretty quick, and I will be available for questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that great information. We will turn it over now to Chief Kendall with Spartanburg Police Department, who will talk about de-escalation, prevention, and data.
Thank you, Chief, and good morning, everyone. And certainly to everyone that's involved with this great work, just thank you for all that you're doing, that you have done and that you will continue to do. My assignment this morning is to talk about prevention and de-escalation. And then training is a part of that. And so I will start by saying this. First of all, I'll thank Chief Hamby because he just gave a lesson that defines what every agency should be instilling in their officers when they first come on board. And that's that explanation of what authority do they have in terms of utilizing force. And the term we reverted to, as Chief Stewart did in his agency, utilizing the term response to resistance several years ago. And a part of that was about mindset for officers, understanding that you are responding to the actions of the individuals that you're dealing with. So that's, we refer in our policy as response to resistance as well. So first of all, the first step in preventing certainly is making sure our personnel have an understanding of what constitutional authority they have to utilize force. And so that's a part of prevention. Folks have to understand. We have to make sure they understand the laws, they understand the rules, they understand our policies. Training has been mentioned several times this morning, and that is critically important in terms of preventing, because we have to train people. Chief Stewart talked about the review processes. That's critically important as well in terms of prevention, because through reviewing, we identify those training needs, we identify where we need to correct issues. So that's very, very important. I will say this, de-escalation is not a replacement for the use of force. And I think folks need to understand that. But what it is a mindset that we hope to instill in our officers that will, where possible, aid in reducing the need for the use of force. And therefore, it is another option that should be considered. And we want folks to, and I say a mindset because we want our officers to consider de-escalation techniques and strategies in every interaction they have with citizens. Now, based on the circumstances, we know that you can't always get as engaged in those de-escalation techniques as you perhaps would like to, because we have to recognize that no training can ever reasonably be expected to stop all incidents from escalating. And so the situation itself determines what options are available to the officer. One of the most important things that we want our personnel to understand as police officers, we have a responsibility not to escalate situations. So we need to be about reducing the intensity of those situations. And that's what de-escalation is. It's simply trying to slow things down. You know, first of all, you got to make sure that you're in a safe environment, but it's slowing things down and hopefully creating an environment where the use of force is not necessary. There have been cries for calls from the community for de-escalation training. I submit to you that professional law enforcement officers have been engaging in de-escalation strategies for many, many, many years. As Chief Hamby mentioned, probably about 5 years ago, we started to see more questions or receive more questions about it. And certainly in 2020, that became a very popular topic. They're officers, again, professional officers who have been using those strategies for many, many years. At the Spartanburg Police Department, our numbers from January 1st, 2019 until 2 days ago, we responded to 135,665 calls for service. Out of that number, we had 56 incidents where officers actually deployed force. That does not include, but in addition to those 56 now, we also count, and if you notice when you looked at Chief Stewart's numbers, you saw where he had weapon drawn. We recorded that data because that's important. Because as we review those incidents, it's an opportunity for us to make sure that the officers are within policy, within our policies, when they are drawing their weapons. But for us, there were actually 56 incidents where officers utilized their hands to help restrain someone, to help bring someone under control. That's less than 1%. And that's not a foreign number for agencies. That's more in line with what happens every day in law enforcement in terms of incidents where force is used. So incidents where officers have made the assessment in situations and they determine that it is necessary to utilize force as a strategy to make sure to further ensure safety, it's very minimal. You know, the high priority cases, they certainly get the attention. And I would be remiss if I didn't say to you, I certainly understand that in law enforcement, as in every profession, there are individuals who should not be a part of our profession. But the majority of the officers who serve as police officers, individuals who serve as police officers, their goal is to do the right thing. And they try to do the right thing. We're certainly not perfect. We make mistakes, but it's important that we acknowledge those mistakes when we identify them. So again, de-escalation is about prevention. Training is about prevention. Policy reviews, that's about prevention. So there is work to be done. Chief Stewart mentioned national reporting. And so there's a lot of work to be done to gain compliance throughout the profession in terms of updating and providing information to that national database. So we're going to continue to move forward. And I'm positive that everyone that's represented here, all the chiefs that are represented here, are certainly committed to helping to advance where we are in terms of being professional law enforcement officers. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Kendall. Very well spoken, very well said. Appreciate that. So at this point, each of the chiefs have had a chance to provide some opening information to consume. And at this point, I believe we'll turn it over to Mr. Jim Shue, who will get us into some question and answers.
Great. Thank you, Chief Hamby. And first, let me just say that sort of overview on use of force authority, training, oversight, de-escalation, that was, I thought, perfect and really set a good framework for what I think will be a really good kind of dialogue and conversation, you know, with the group that's attending today. I guess to get us started, I did want to give brief introductions to three of our community leaders who are joining us today, who are going to sort of help facilitate the questions and hopefully get the dialogue started. First, Reverend James Clark, who is the pastor of Wilson Calvary Baptist Church in Anderson, South Carolina, is joining us. Reverend Clark is a graduate of Southside High School in Greenville and was drafted into the U.S. Army, where he had appointments in all over Europe, into Alaska, where he was then called into ministry. He received his Bachelor of Science degree from Voorhees College and his Master's of Divinity from Erskine Theological Seminary. And Reverend Clark, thank you so much for joining us. Also, Lamont Sullivan is on the Zoom with us. Lamont is the Assistant Vice President for Advancement and Alumni Engagement at North Greenville University. And he's also the former President and CEO of Big Brothers and Big Sisters of the Upstate. Lamont is a graduate and also, I'll add, a Hall of Fame athlete of Travelers Rest High School. And he received both his bachelor's degree and master's degree in Christian ministry from North Greenville University. And then Dr. Jackie Blakely is joining us as well. Dr. Blakely is the Dean of the Business and Public Services Division at Tri-County Technical College, where she has served since 2008. She has responsibility for 3 departments there: computer information technology, business technology, and public service. She is active in leadership roles with multiple community organizations, including Anderson County First Steps, the Girl Scouts of South Carolina, and Leadership Anderson. And Dr. Blakely holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from University of Georgia, a master's in business administration from Clemson University, and a doctorate in educational leadership from Clemson University. So I'm going to turn the floor over to our three community leaders. Thank you so much for joining us. And I will let you all begin with questions for our police chief panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jim, for having us today. And there are several questions in the chat, some which are very probing questions that I think would be great to just go ahead and address in the limited time that we do have left. One question from Stan Davis on the use of force and accountability states, how is officer to officer accountability addressed during situations where use of force is used? Example, there were officers watching George Floyd during the whole time while he was asking for help. So if one of the chiefs could speak into that, I think that's a great place for us to start today.
Well, let me just speak to that. That's one of the things that we recognize, and that's why we have the duty to intervene. That is basically one of the things that we put out, and every agency has that, should have that policy and go by that policy. And it is the duty of an officer to confront another officer, to intervene in that officer when that particular officer is doing something that is not lawful. And so that is one of the things here that we have, is that we do have that duty to intervene that we stress is very, very vital. And the officers have to follow that particular policy that we have.
And as a follow-up to that, Chief Taylor, if I can ask, I heard you mention earlier about the national database that agencies require that we have when use of force is there and the officer is removed from a particular agency as a result of excessive use of force. For that national database, is that something that local agencies across the nation are required to check in vetting a new officer candidate for a potential appointment to a position at another law enforcement agency?
Well, I can speak on South Carolina and how it goes in South Carolina. I don't know if every agency subscribes to that nationwide, but we're one of the states that actually submit those names. It's not just for excessive force, but it's in any situation where an officer is not accredited. But here in the state of South Carolina, every agency from the command staff level, when they are doing their background, pre-hire backgrounds for an officer that has been certified, have to go through the academy to see what the status is of that particular officer. And so that's one of the things that we stop is what we call the gypsy cop. And most chiefs who know what I'm talking about is the guys that they get in trouble and somebody will terminate them and they would go to another agency. By law, if it is a particular criteria, if a person has been untruthful, or if it's an excessive force situation where the person is terminated, by law, they have to report that as misconduct. The agency has to report it by misconduct. Not only that, they have to come for an administrative hearing. And by law, and what we do is we had agencies that would report somebody for a misconduct issue or an allegation. It would not come to court, not come to an administrative hearing to prove that. So now what we do is, from the academy's perspective, is we're able to find an agency that does not come to that hearing. That does not come to the hearing. So if they terminate somebody for misconduct, we're able to find the agency if they do not appear, because if they don't appear, we have to dismiss that. And so that was happening. So we do have some things in place now to hopefully bring better compliance through all the agencies we have in South Carolina.
And as a conclusion to my question session, if I heard you correctly, you did state that the national database registry was not required nationwide.
It's not required nationwide. I don't think everybody follows it nationwide, but we go ahead and we're submitting those names. You know, anyway, we're going to do our part. But I tell you, you know, in South Carolina, we have to have a vetting process, and that vetting process has to work based on the chiefs doing what they've been required to do when they do discharge somebody for misconduct.
Thank you so much, Chief Taylor, and that'll conclude my time. Jim, if Dr. Blakely or Raymond Clark wants to chime in at this time.
Yes, I have two questions. One is has to in reference to your question. If a chiefs mentioned that if a officers are making an arrest and the other officers are obligated to step in if they see something that is awry. However, if a senior officer arrives, how do these junior officers know when they need to step in? I mean, I'm talking about human nature here now. When the senior officer steps in and says, "I got this," you know, that's question one. My second question is, when there's an officer that does have an issue with profiling, how does the agency even look at that? Or is there a tracking mechanism that says that this officer seems to be having more arrests of a particular type and fines than seemingly with other genders or races? Those are my two questions.
Well, let me just say, excuse me, the first question, I think most of us have it in our policy. The duty to intervene says every officer of this agency has an affirmative duty to intervene in actions of another officer who is applying excessive or deadly force in the violation of this policy or law in order to prevent unnecessary injury to death. Additionally, all personnel have an affirmative duty to report any use of force which they witness that is a violation with this policy. So it says all. The other thing is we have a duty of care. Officers have an affirmative duty to care for persons in their custody. Officers have an affirmative duty to provide and obtain medical attention for members of the public who are injured as a result of police-involved actions. So I think that clearly says all. You know, we don't have to wait for a supervisor to get on scene. Everybody is held accountable in that particular situation. The second thing, we talk about profiling. When you do that, and I guess some of the chiefs can chime in, it depends on when you start talking about having more arrests and all. Well, it depends on where you're working at. What is the population? You know, if you have like me, I work West Greenville, so of course my arrests are going to be more predominantly Black because I'm working in West Greenville area. So we have to take that in consideration. One of the things that we look at from profile, you know, you cannot racial profile, but can you profile based on giving certain things like certain crimes and certain ways that people do these particular crimes is one thing. But the other thing is anytime my officers stop a vehicle by state law, and the other chiefs can tell you, by state law, when I stop you, I have to fill out a form, a summons. It's a ticket. It's a way that we track. It's a way that we track what an officer is doing. In other words, even if I don't cite you on a traffic violation, I still have to submit this particular form. And it just says that you were stopped at this certain date, and it should have the particulars, Black, male, Hispanic, female, or whatever. So those are things that we can track too. If you got an officer that happens to be stopping Hispanics and he's stopping Hispanics more, well, we have to take into consideration, okay, what's the area that he's assigned to? You know, we have to look at the demographics. The other thing is he just singling out? And so we can go back and we can track that information to see if he's just stopping a certain group of people and those kind of things. So there are some mechanisms in Chief Hanby or Chief Kendall or Anderson or Stewart, if you want to kind of chime in on that.
I'll just add on top of what Chief Taylor just said. The public contact form is what he was talking about during a vehicle stop. If they're not cited, that record has to be entered, and most of that's done electronically these days. But that information is also available to the public. Go to the website for the South Carolina Department of Public Safety and you can search for public contacts, and it'll list, you can break it down to agency and look at the numbers of how many that fit different types of categories of race, gender, age, that type of thing. So that's available to the public.
Okay, and I suppose I don't want to be a dead horse here, but I just been involved in situations, for example, young white female ran a red light and hit a black female, and the police said there was no one at fault. I mean, that's just blatant.
So obviously I wasn't there, so it's hard for me to tell you, but I will tell you on a red light collision, unless there are independent witnesses, it's a lot of times one side of the story versus the other side. And frequently in that kind of scenario, both parties truly do believe in their heart that they had a green light. And so with that, it's really hard to provide proof, so to speak, that someone was contributing when you don't have that information. So the officer has to list both of them as not contributing and let the insurance companies kind of figure out the rest of it, because it is kind of a civil issue. It's a civil report. Those are hard. Those red light issues are very hard unless you have an independent witness who does stand by and provide their name and what they saw.
Okay.
And my question is related to the psychological testing. We had some questions, I think, in the chat as well. So how often, I know you said that people go through this, but how often do they have these tests? And what exactly are you looking for to make an analysis of if this person is actually qualified or if they are capable of, being fair and just in situations?
And answer that.
Go ahead.
We mostly do the psychological testing as a requirement for the Criminal Justice Academy. Most of us have what we call early warning indicators. If we see an officer that's out a good bit due to sickness, or there's an excessive use of force, or a change in work performance, or something of that nature, we have ability or the availability for employee assistance programs, and that's usually the way we run that through our personnel. They will share limited parts of that with us if the officer is getting counseling or something like that. And that could come as a result too of a traumatic incident. The officer witnessed a death or been involved in a shooting or something of that nature. And then we kind of reach out to SLED with that, with the LEAP program, and there's some counseling. But as far as continuing psychological tests, we don't really do that unless there's an issue or something that really comes to the burner.
I'll also add that on the front end, the benefit of the psychological test, I mean, you're looking for whether or not that individual has a psychological profile that's suitable for law enforcement. The other thing it's going to do, it's a part of that comprehensive background investigation, and it often may give you leads that you did not discover absent the psychological exam that you need to follow up on to confirm that this person is a good fit for the profession as well as for your organization. So they're critically important. They're very helpful. kudos to the state of South Carolina for mandating that as a requirement. Until in recent years, it was not a requirement. And there were many agencies across our state who did not utilize the benefit of the psychological exam. So they're very useful. And as Chief Stewart indicated, if you have an employee, if there's been some, if they've got some crisis in their life or been a part of some critical incident, you may make that decision based on the circumstances. Okay, I need to send this person for a psychological exam to determine if they're ready to come back to work.
I want to add one small little comment on that as well. The psychological exams are extremely intense. They go very deep. We are not looking for obvious mental illness. It goes much further beyond that. We're not trying to identify if someone has or is bipolar or has schizophrenia. I mean, we're looking at just what Chief Kendall said. Are they suitable for this profession? And these psychological tests have been developed and perfected and fine-tuned over a long period of time. They're not something new. They've been around forever. And but they have they're developed by scientific research from police psychologists, and they are based on who typically succeeds in this career, who does not succeed. So they're looking for consistencies regarding personality, and even the tests that we're requiring our applicants to go through, they also include a component of emotional intelligence. So we'll get a report back. Not only are they psychologically fit or not, but also we learn about their emotional intelligence quotient or IQ. So if they have communication skills, we're going to find that out. If they are struggling with communication skills, that's a problem for us. There are instances where they'll develop a identification of a prior traumatic event in someone's life that they may have experienced when they were, for example, as a teenager. And it's really been frustrating sometimes for me when we identify someone who I think would be an outstanding candidate for this profession, yet we get a result back from their psychological exam that says, something occurred traumatic in their life, and it's really on the surface. So they'll sometimes not pass the test. And I'll admit, I'm tempted to go against the results of the test. And that's over my long period of being in this career, I've learned, trust the test, trust it, and go with the recommendation. So, it's hard to get hired. And I do want to promote one of our following sessions will be about hiring, retention, and recruiting. And we'll talk a lot more about that issue.
Just let me just say from the academy, the aspect of the academy, when you start talking about what should it consist of, and basically I just read to you what from the academy, from our perspective of what that evaluation, every agency can choose their own individual to do the testing, their own agency, to do the testing. But the evaluation content, the evaluation content, and I just read it, says the human reliability interview should cover development milestones, academic history, work history, psychological and substance use history, interpersonal relationships, legal history, coping skills, and management of financial responsibilities. The psychological evaluation should specifically address the following individual factors: freedom from any emotional or mental conditions that might adversely affect the performance of law enforcement in duties and responsibilities, stress, resilience, and emotional stability to withstand the psychological demands in the position of a law enforcement officer, interpersonal effectiveness, self-control, impulse control, decision-making ability, respect for rules and authority, judgment, threat immunity, and reasonable courage, self-awareness, and it goes on and on. So it's wide variety of things that we look for within the concept of these psychological tests. And the chief Matt hit it on the head. If they fail that, is we're not going to hire. We have to trust the process.
Well, we could certainly go on around a number of these topic areas for quite a bit longer, but we are at our time. I do most especially want to thank everyone who's been a part of this, our law enforcement officers, our community leaders, and others who have put questions in the chat. You know, we're just scratching the surface with this conversation, and we could certainly, as I said, go on longer on this topic, but we are at time, and it illustrates why we're going to do 3 additional sessions here over the coming months. All of them are intertwined, as you can tell. So I am very thrilled about what I feel has been great dialogue and the beginning of that conversation and transparency today from everyone. And hopefully you all agree, and hopefully we can continue to build on this over the next several months as we keep working on this. I did want to mention that in addition to these virtual sessions, Dr. Blakely at Tri-County is working on an in-person session. She's had some group sessions there in the Anderson, Pickens, and Coney area, and she's working with our Safer Upstate committee to move forward on some sessions, additional sessions in the fall in that part of the region, and we're going to hopefully expand those across the entire upstate over the next year. So our intent is not only to have Zoom sessions, but also to have opportunities for conversations amongst law enforcement and our community in person in the coming months. So with that, we do not yet have a date for our second session around technology, but we will be setting that in the coming days. We're looking at late September, early October, and we plan on, again, having all 4 of these before the end of the year. I hope all of you have felt this has been of value. We certainly can continue the dialogue moving forward. I hope you'll plan on joining us for the next session, and please feel free to invite others to be part of these as well. I most especially want to thank Chief Hamby for your great work. Again, thank you so much for really taking the lead on this and your willingness to jump in and get some great panelists for this session. I'm excited about the sessions to come. So with that, Chief Hamby, do you have anything to add? And then we will adjourn for today.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all the attention for a very important topic for our community all across the upstate. And thank you for the participation from the other chiefs as well. Really appreciate the openness and transparency, and look forward to what we can do in the future.
Well, with that, we will adjourn for today. Again, thank you, and please be on the lookout. We'll send a recap and the YouTube so you can have this session, the recording, and send that out to others who might be interested. And we look forward to getting back in a few weeks to talk about technology. Have a great day, and be safe.
Thanks, everyone.